Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar, Open University.
Namaskar dear students, I welcome you at our Chaitanya studio. Today we will be talking on Eugene Nida's model of translation, which is a part of the paper on translation studies, paper 4B. So let's start our lecture. So first we will have some biographical details of Eugene Nida, which will help us to understand the model that we are going to learn. So as we can see, he was born in 1914 and he is an American translation theorist as well as he was a linguist. He belongs to the school of American linguistics. He is now known as Patriarch of Translation Studies. If we talk about Eugene Nida, he was first associated with American Bible Society, and his job was to check and evaluate the publications of translations, specifically of Bible translations. He used to check and evaluate various kinds of translations that were done by missionaries. There was a moment where missionaries used to translate Bibles in various languages. You must be knowing there was missionary schools in India where they used to teach Christian ethics values through Bible, and for that to teach that in their languages in India, in Indian languages, missionaries used to translate these translations, and he joined Eugene Nida joined American Bible Society to check and evaluate their publications. He did his PhD in linguistics. He used to at that time counsel missionaries, as I said, and then he got really an amazing job at United Bible Societies, and he was a translating research coordinator, and while doing this work he came up with the model of translations based on the theories that he created, theories that he came up with. So let's learn about Nida's model of translation. But before we do that, what was the situation of Bible translations? We need to know, we need to understand, so that he had to come up with the new model of translation. So what was the situation before that? Let's learn that. So as you can see over here, there was an emphasis on technical accuracy and literalism. There was much emphasis on technical accuracy and literalism for translations. When you are translating Bible, it was like there should be a technical accuracy. Suppose there is a sentence A, B, C, D, maybe subject, verb, object and other words. Then in other languages this would not be the case, but it should be literally used like as it had been said. So in other languages it should follow the same pattern of the sentence structure, as it focused on technical accuracy and literalism. So there was a negative effect on Bible in 19th century. So with that, if we talk about these two translations, the first one is 1881 and 1885, which was by King James the First of England. He revised, it is known as revised version of Bible, and in 1901 there was an American version of Bible. And if you talk about both these translations, there was literal translations, as in it was word by word translation, not sense by sense translations. And it was limited to theological phonies, which means it was limited to the people of church, maybe clergies, fathers. It was limited to them. There is a survey, if you can see, there is a survey, research on types of Bible translations. And these are word for word translation. And if you see, both is New American Standard Bible of Translation or a revised King James version of translation, both of this, they were word for word translation. So there was a negative impact of this translation. There was a negative effect of these translations, because when you talk about word for word translation, it does not make any meaning. It was meaningless translations. So this was the kind of situations before Nida's model of translations. And when we talk about these old translations of 19th century, what were the problems? What were the things which were there with the old translations? So they did not communicate effectively. As I said, it was word for word translations. So it would not be able to communicate. It would have no meaning. It would be meaningless. And it was literal awkward syntax, because if you see the syntax of Indian languages, it would be SOV, subject, object and verb, whereas English has SVO. So there would be a literal awkward syntax in these translations. So Nida rejected the concept that an orthographic words have a fixed meaning. There is a concept that an orthographic means the words either in written form or in spoken form or printed words, they have meanings. He rejected that. If you have written a sentence like this or SVO in Indian languages, it would, जैसे कि मैं खेलता हूँ cricket. This sentence is simple, so it might make, if you try to understand, it might make sense. But this kind of sentence pattern would be meaningless. It would, though the words are there together, it should have a proper structure. So he rejected the concept of an orthographic words have fixed meaning. So he came up with a work while he was doing research, as he was associated with United Bible Society, and his work was also as a researcher. He came up with an article in 1959 titled Principles of Translation as Exemplified by Bible Translating. So the job that he was doing, he would have done the analysis of it, and he created some principles for translating this Bible translations. As he said, principles of translation is exemplified by Bible translating. So in 1951, he writes an article in Bible Translator, which was published by United Bible Society, and there he prioritized what he is famous for, the concept of dynamic equivalence of formal correspondence in translation. We will be talking about dynamic equivalence, formal equivalence, functional equivalence, kind of types of equivalence when we will be talking about the model of translations. Let's just create a basic background for us to understand the model of these translations. In 1959, in 1959, he comes up with this article, and after a few years, in 1964, he comes up with a text towards a science of translating. So he considers translation as a science. His model of translation is based on scientific translation. So he says, toward a science of translating, he comes up with this text and he postulates dynamic equivalent translation as, he talked about dynamic equivalent translations, right? What he says about dynamic equivalent translation is, in such a translation, one is not so concerned with matching the receptor language message, but with dynamic relationship. What does dynamic relationship mean? the relationship between the receptor and the message should be substantially the same as that which existed between the original receptionist and a message. If you find it a little bit complicated, I'll give you a simple example. When Shakespeare wrote for Elizabethan age, he would have tried to convey the meaning in that context during Elizabethan age. Now, in a modern language, specifically talking about India, suppose in Hindi, I am translating Shakespeare in Hindi, I am writing it for a Hindi audience. So, the way the message of Shakespeare's plays conveyed it for the Elizabethan audience or Elizabethan audience of England, it should convey the same kind of meaning. So, my emphasis should be on the audience I am writing for, I am translating for, and not for Elizabethan audience, or not with the language that Shakespeare wrote. While I am translating, my emphasis should be on my readers, my audience, the receptor audience, and that should be a dynamic relationship should be there. Let's read it again. In such a translation, imagine Shakespeare's play, a translation of Shakespeare's play. In such a translation, one is not so concerned with the matching the receptor language. Receptor language means here the Hindi audience that I am having. One is not concerned with the matching the receptor language message, but with the dynamic relationship. What does dynamic relationship mean? The relationship between the receptor and the message should be substantially the same. My relationship of my audience I am translating for should be the same as that which existed between the original receptionist and the message. If we talk about the Bible translations of the 19th century that were there, they were literal, which means the focus was on the source language text or a source language message. Here, if you see, the focus is on the audience, receptor audience. He argued that a word acquires its meaning through its context and can produce varying responses to its culture. Maybe if you talk about certain words, if you talk about Shakespeare's language, at that time he used the word gay, which meant to be happy. But today, it might not have the same meaning. It might be used for alternate sexuality. It would be used for other sexualities. If you talk about India, and if you talk about before partition, India would have included Bangladesh or Pakistan, but the word India would have a different meaning today. Are you getting it? Argued that a word acquires its meanings through its context. In which context I am talking about India? In which context I am talking about the word gay? Its context and can produce varying responses to its culture. It should be read diachronically, the words. He suggested meaning is broken into three. He said that meanings can be divided into three. First is linguistic meaning, which means grammatical meanings, referential or denotative meanings, and the third is emotive or connotative meanings. This we will take while we will be discussing the first step of the model of translation, which is analysis. I am not going into the depth right now about this because we will require to learn it while we will be learning the model of translation. So, next, techniques of determining meaning of lexical items. Lexical items means items of vocabulary. Lexical items can be words, various parts of the words, idioms, phrases, sayings. These are what? Various parts of the vocabulary. Lexicon. The lexical items, the word comes from lexicon. So, techniques of determining. Determining means to decide. So he gave various techniques to determine, to decide the meanings of lexical items. How can you decide the meaning of certain words that is given to you, certain idioms that is given to you in the sentences? So he said that it can be divided into three. There are three techniques basically. The first is hierarchical structuring. Second is componential analysis. Second is componential analysis. And the third is semantic structure analysis. First one is hierarchical structuring. Second is componential analysis. And the third is semantic structure analysis. Let's learn these techniques one by one. The first one is hierarchical structuring. What do you mean by hierarchy? Hierarchy means you can be divided into 1, into 2, then into 3. Like hierarchy, there is a pattern. So you differentiate the series of words according to their levels. Minimal, maximal, उससे ज़्यादा. So hierarchical structuring, the first one. The first technique is hierarchical structuring. Suppose I tell you, if I want to divide animals, can it be divided into wild and tame animals? Then wild animals would be lion, cheetah, tiger. Tame animals, cow, dog, then cat, etc. So I'm creating a hierarchy where wild would be the first, under that there will be tame. So I'm creating a hierarchy. Can be divided into two, superordinates and hyponyms. Like humans. Humans can be divided into man, women, child. Man is powerful than women, child is, women is powerful than child. Likewise, animals, this is a hypothetically. Animals, lion, tiger, goat, cow, etc. Lion and tiger are somewhat more wild than goat, dog and cow. So they are super than goat, dog and cow. Then flowers. Flowers can also be divided into lotus, rose, sunflower. Some flowers smell strong. Some flowers would smell light. Then you can create a hierarchy in that. So hierarchical structuring technique is useful. It is useful at times, but not in all cases, not all the time. In such cases, the remaining other two techniques can be used. So let's learn the other two techniques. The first one, hierarchical structuring, is I'm sure it's clear. You create a hierarchy of words that are given to you. Second is componential analysis. You know component, right? I'm sure you must be knowing the word components from their componential analysis. What you do here is you find out the meaning by dividing into various components. Suppose here we have the word groom. So who is groom generally called? A young man mostly, who is unmarried, going to get married, king of the wedding day. When you talk about also here it's man. Suppose the moment I remove groom and I write bride, then it would be a young woman, unmarried, queen of the day, wedding day. Widow. When do you use the word widow? For what do you use it? Widow is somebody who is already married, maybe a woman who is wife whose husband is dead, whose husband is no more, female, husband died, good morning. A greeting, a formal greeting, friendly greeting, when you meet for the first time of the day. So these are the components of those words. And you can generate a meaning, you can create a meaning, you can find out the meaning from dividing it into components. And what this kind of technique, what this technique, componential analysis, does, it identifies and discriminates specific features of a range of related words. Each and every word would have its own specific meaning, and this technique will help you to identify and discriminate specific features of a range of related words. Suppose I say man and boy. Boy would be somebody who's young, teen. Man would be mature, more than 25 years old mostly. Yes, somebody who has already left the puberty. Generally. So it identifies and discriminates specific features of a range of related words. And the results can be made plotted visually to assist in making an overall comparison. You would be able to compare those words, and then you will be able to translate them in a better way. You would be able to translate it in a better way. Next one is semantic structure analysis. I am sure you know what semantics, the school of linguistics, means. Semantics is related to meanings of words, related to study of meanings of the words, that is semantic. So semantic structure analysis, what it does is it separates out visually the different meanings of a word on the basis of its context, in which context the particular words are used and what is the meaning of it. Here we have the word spirit. Spirit can be the word, can have various meanings that can be used in various contexts. So there are characteristics. Suppose it has humans, it can be used for humans as well as for non-humans. Humans would be ghost of a man, right? Spirit can mean ghost of, or maybe demon, demonic character. Whereas spirit can have also used in a non-human's way. Suppose for the spirit of a god, an angel, or for demigods. Yes, or it can also be used in a good or a bad way. Like for ethos, gods, it is used in a good way. It is used in a good sense. Whereas alcoholic, demonic, it would be used in a bad sense. So you can divide it into according to their characteristics, that is semantic structure analysis. What this technique does, it stresses the importance of the context for communication, in which context the particular word is used. This technique helps you to understand in which context the particular words are used when you are dealing with the metaphorical meaning and complex cultural idioms. Let's take two examples. The very first one is a Hebrew idiom that we are having, that is ben kupa. Kupa. So what the literal meaning of ben means a child in Hebrew, and kupa means a bride chamber. So if you take out the literal meaning, literally it would mean children of the bride chamber. But If we talk about the specific idiom, it refers to the wedding guest, and specifically those the friend circle or the friends of that bridegroom. That the bene kupa means the group of friends of the bridegroom. The very easy one for Indians, you often use मेरे पेट में चूहे दौड़ रहा है. If you literally translate this idiom, it means rats are running in my stomach. But does it really mean? It's a literal meaning. What it refers to is, now I'm really hungry. It talks about the hunger for food. So, if you, in what sense it is used, in what context this particular idiom, pet mein choohe dod rahe hai, is used, you would be able to translate it in a better way. Three techniques, if you check back, first is hierarchical structuring, you create a hierarchy. Second is componential analysis, where you look at the different components of the words. And the third one is semantic structure analysis, where you focus on the characteristics of those particular words, semantics. So what this technique, particularly semantic structure analysis, does, it clarifies the ambiguities, it clarifies the problems that the word would have. It elucidate means simplify obscure passages. If the obscure, very complex paragraph is there, complex passage is there, it would help you to simplify it. When a sentence is made up of almost 3 to 4 lines, you will be able to elucidate it, and it identifies cultural differences. When you would try to translate this phrase, पेट में चूहे दौड़ रहा है, you would not translate it in a sense that the rats are running in my stomach. You will try to find a similar idiom that is used in your language that you are translating in, and then you will be able to do that. It would identify the cultural differences that would be there. So next is he comes up with the theory and practical translation. This is the book which is very important for students of translation studies. This text comes in 1969. Till the time, he had not given the particular specific definition of dynamic equivalence. He had various times used this particular word dynamic equivalence, but now in the text in 1969, he if you remember in the last text, he had talked about dynamic relationship that is there, not about dynamic equivalence. He had not defined it. So here in this text 1969, the theory and practice of translation, he defines dynamic equivalence in terms of the degree to which the receptors of the message in the receptor language respond to it in substantially the same manner as the receptors of the source language. We had learned dynamic relationship. We had talked about dynamic. So it should have an equivalence, means equal value. It should have equal value, not the same value. So here he has defined dynamic equivalence. He says dynamic equivalence in a sense of the degree to which the receptor of the message in the receptor language respond to it in substantially the same manner. You will respond. If you are reading the translated text, you will be responding it to in the same way, same manner, the way the receptor of, which means the source text audience, would respond to the source language text. The expression of a dynamic equivalence was superseded by functional equivalence in his work One Language to Another, which comes in 1986. We will be talking about functional equivalence. It has a similar kind of a meaning that he conveys, but he was superseded. First he talked about dynamic equivalence, and then he uses the term functional equivalence in his text One Language to Another, in which he majorly focused on the function of words used in the language. We will be talking about it So if you want to talk about the difference between the formal equivalence and dynamic equivalence, the two types of equivalence, here I would want you to understand equivalence does not mean the same meanings or the same words, the words which have equal values. What equivalence means? The words which have equal values. Formal equivalence and dynamic equivalence. If you see before these words or terms that Nida comes with, there were all terms such as literal or free or faithful translations. It was discarded by Eugene Nida in favor of two basic orientations of types of equivalence, and two orientations are formal equivalence and dynamic equivalence. First, they used to say this is a free translation, this is a literal translation, this is a faithful translation, this is unfaithful translations. But he discarded all of them and he says that there can be a formal equivalence with the translation and there can be dynamic equivalence with the translation. Let's learn one after other. So when we talk about formal equivalence, formal equal value of the translations, what it means is it focuses on the message itself in both form and content. I'll explain it. What he basically means is, I'll again take the example of Shakespeare. So suppose Shakespeare writes most of his plays with the use of blank verse in his text. Now when you are translating it in Hindi, translating it for Indian audiences, what you will do is you will focus the message itself in both form and content. So what you will do is you will try to write it in a blank verse, but the closer whichever meter or you call it chand. So in whichever chand or whichever meter that is there, you will try to focus and write that play in with the use of the meter or the chand which is available in your target language. So your focus would be more on form as well as the content. You will not really focus on the meaning that it conveys to the receptor or how your receptor would respond to it. Your focus would be largely on your source text, because you are trying to find out what these words are available which are used in Shakespeare's plays, or which meters or which chand are available which are closer to blank words. So this formal equivalence focuses on the message itself in both form as well as content. You will be focusing on the similar words and similar meter or whatever other form, structure that would be there. The message in the receptor language should match as closely as possible in the different elements in the source language. As I said, your focus would be conveying the meaning which is closer to your source text. So your source text is given much importance in formal equivalence. So it keenly oriented toward the source text structure, as I said, which exerts strong influence in determining accuracy and correctness. So you will be focusing on whether the translation that I am doing is accurate or not, whether it is correct or not, by comparing it with the source text. Most typical of these translations are gloss translations with a close approximation to source text structure, often with scholarly footnotes. So now when you are trying to, when I would try to use certain words such as chai, jalebi. So what I will do is I will not translate jalebi as a sweet, but I will create a footnote over there. I will create a footnote for chai. I will try to footnote for Benekupa. So it would be full of footnotes and it would be like a kind of a gloss translation. because your major focus is on which text? Source text, and the language form contains that your source text is used. Nida is famous for dynamic or functional equivalence. What is the function of language in your translation? The dynamic relationship that you are having with your receptor audience that he is talking about. The principle of equivalent effect. If you want to have a kind of equivalent effect, not equal, not the same, equivalent effect, where the relationship between receptor and the message. Here, if you see, you are talking about the relationship between receptor and the message. In formal, if you see, there was a relationship between source text language and target text, target language text. Here, the relationship is between receptor and the message that you are sending. It should be substantially the same that which existed between the original receptor and the message. So here the comparison, if you see, is about the relationship that a source language text and a source language text audience is having. There should be a same kind of relationship between the target text and the target text audience. So with this, what happens? That complete naturalness of expression is the key requirement. It should be natural, it should not be artificial. Then you will have a kind of a relationship with your audience. It should read naturally to you. The message has to be modified to the receptor's linguistic needs. You will not write so many footnotes for it. You will find an alternate words which are there in your language. Though words would not be the focus on, the meaning that is conveyed would be the focus for you. The message, as I said, the meaning has to be modified to the receptor's linguistic needs and cultural expectations. You will try to find an equivalent idioms. You will try to find out equivalent sayings that would be available to your audience, which they would be familiar with, which they would found it natural to them. This receptor oriented approach of grammar, of lexicon means vocabulary. The receptor oriented approach. So this approach by Nida of functional equivalence or dynamic equivalence approach is receptor oriented, of grammar, vocabulary, and of cultural references to be essential in order to achieve naturalness. What are the cultural references which are there? And those cultural references should be kept there with that source language or text, and you find the other cultural expressions which are available in your own culture, in your own language. You use them while translating. The target text language should not be show interference from the source language. The target text language should not show interference. There should be no any kind of interference from the source language, and the foreignness of source text settings is minimized. So while I would be trying to use Iago when I am translating Hamlet, I would come up with the header. Then it would be dynamic equivalence. You must be thinking about all the, if you take all the Sanjay Leela Bhansali films, they are translations. Be it Ram Leela for Romeo and Juliet, what it does is he brings Kutch, he brings Ram and Leela, because they would be familiar with that there was no caste issue in Romeo and Juliet. But here in Ram Leela, he is familiar with the caste issues which are very much present in their own culture. So with that, you will do that. The target text language should not show any indifference from the source language, and the foreignness of the source text setting is minimized. So when you talk about functional equivalence or dynamic equivalence, he says that the role of a functional equivalence for having a good translation, the functional level at the minimal level, it should look like it is a realistic. The role of functional equivalence at minimal level, it should be realistic, and at maximal level it would be ideal. Then it would create a good translation. This is what Nida says in his text 1993, which was published in 1993, Language, Culture and Translating. And functional equivalence is much more focuses on the cultural expressions of the text. Now, he comes up with the next text in 1969, as I had said, the theory and practice of translation. He comes up with this dynamic equivalence, as I said. It is more based on receptor's response, and here we have a shift from form of the message, as I said, to the response of the receptor. And he also talks about the faithful translation. What is faithful translation? This faithful translation compares the formal structures between, not with the source text and its translations, but with source text and the receptor of the response. Whether the receptor's response in the target text, is it the same as it is in source text or not? There should not be much worry about the verbal correspondence. Leave it. What he says is, have a look, have a focus on the reaction of the reader of receptor's language. Then he gives an example that your faithful translation looks like a market research. Look at the response of the receptors which are there. And then your faithful translation is like a market research. This was the enough background that you would require to understand the model of translation. Please study it carefully. In the next class, we will be focused and we will come up with the model of translation that he had come up with, which he has suggested to use for the translation. It is based on communication, the act of communication. I would want or request you to have a search on the model of translation which Nida gives. Have a look at it, have some reading of it, so you would be able to understand it in a better way. Have a background that Nida, have a look at, and maybe listen the audio or this text again and again, so it would generate a background which will help you to understand the model of translation. Thank you for joining the lecture. We'll again meet to understand the model of translation that Eugene Nida has given. Thank you. Namaskar. See you in the next lecture.